Sarah Chen stared at the final rejection email on her phone, her savings account balance glowing mockingly at $37. The employment counselor, Mrs. Patterson, shuffled through a stack of applications with practiced sympathy. 3 months of unemployment had stripped away Sarah's initial optimism, leaving behind a raw determination that surprised even herself. The office buzzed with the quiet desperation of the unemployed, each person clutching their own hopes and fears. "There is one position," Mrs. Patterson said hesitantly, her fingers pausing on a particular file. "But I should warn you, we've sent 12 candidates already. None lasted more than a week." She slid the papers across the desk, revealing an address that made Sarah's eyebrows rise. Blackwood Estate. Even Sarah had heard the stories about Marcus Blackwood, the tech billionaire whose reputation for ruthlessness extended far beyond boardrooms. The salary listed made her breath catch, but the warnings scrawled in red ink told a different story entirely. The taxi driver's nervous glances in the rearview mirror spoke volumes as they approached the Blackwood Estate. Sarah pressed her face to the window, watching as the city's chaos gave way to perfectly manicured wilderness. The estate sprawled across what seemed like endless acres, its Gothic revival architecture looming against storm clouds that seemed perpetually gathered overhead. Ancient gargoyles perched on cornerstones appeared to judge her arrival with stone eyes that had witnessed decades of similar hopefuls. The driver refused to take her all the way to the main entrance, claiming his cab wasn't fancy enough for the circular drive. Sarah paid the fare and walked the remaining quarter mile, her practical heels clicking against cobblestones that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. The mansion grew larger with each step, its countless windows reflecting the overcast sky like empty, watchful eyes. She straightened her shoulders and approached the massive oak doors, knowing that whatever waited inside would either save her financial future or become another story of Blackwood Estate's impossible standards. Mrs. Hartwell, the head housekeeper, examined Sarah with the thoroughness of a military inspection. Her steel gray hair was pulled into a bun so tight it seemed to stretch her already severe features, and her uniform was pressed to knife-edge precision. The foyer's black marble floors reflected Sarah's image back at her, multiplying her nervousness as she stood beneath a chandelier that probably cost more than her college tuition. "Mr. Blackwood values punctuality, discretion, and competence above all else," Mrs. Hartwell announced, her voice echoing in the cavernous space. The previous assistants failed to understand this. They lasted 4 days, 6 days, 2 days, and one particularly unfortunate candidate managed only 6 hours. She handed Sarah a thick folder bound in leather. "Your duties, schedules, and rules are detailed within. Memorize them. Mr. Blackwood does not repeat himself, nor does he tolerate questions that demonstrate inattention to detail." The mansion stretched around them like a small city, its corridors disappearing into shadows that seemed to swallow sound itself. Sarah nodded, accepting the weight of the folder and the unspoken challenge within it. Marcus Blackwood stood silhouetted against windows that offered a commanding view of his empire, his presence filling the office despite not having turned around. Sarah waited in the doorway, clutching the leather folder like a while he concluded a phone call that involved numbers she couldn't comprehend and decisions that would affect thousands of jobs. His office was a study in contrast, classical architecture housing cutting-edge, priceless art-sharing space with multiple screens displaying real. When he finally turned, his steel blue eyes assessed her with the cold calculation of a man accustomed to making instant judgments about people's worth. Marcus Blackwood was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 40, with the kind of sharp, angular features that suggested both intelligence and ruthlessness. His reputation preceded him, a tech genius who'd built his fortune through a combination of brilliant innovation and what his critics called heartless business practices. "Sarah Chen," he said, her name sounding clinical in his precisely modulated voice. "MIT graduate, 3 years at Henderson & Associates before their downsizing, 96% success rate on project completions. Impressive resume for someone currently unemployed." His smile held no warmth. "Let's see if you can succeed where others have failed." Sarah's first week was a masterclass in perfectionism that bordered on obsession. Marcus Blackwood's schedule wasn't merely planned, it was orchestrated with the precision of a Swiss watch. Every meeting had backup venues, alternative transportation arranged, and contingency plans for contingencies. His coffee had to be precisely 160 degrees, served in a specific cup with the handle positioned at exactly 2 o'clock. His dry cleaning was picked up on Tuesdays and Fridays, pressed according to specifications that required a full page of instructions. She learned that his charitable foundation donated millions annually, but he insisted on personally reviewing every recipient. His business empire stretched across 6 continents, yet he demanded to know the quarterly performance metrics of regional managers 3 levels below his direct reports. The man who could buy small countries insisted on approving the weekly grocery order for the estate's kitchen staff. By day 5, Sarah understood why her predecessors had fled. It wasn't just the workload, it was the relentless expectation of perfection without acknowledgement, success without praise, and competence without guidance. Yet something stubborn in her nature refused to surrender. Perhaps it was pride, perhaps desperation, but Sarah Chen had never backed down from a challenge, and Marcus Blackwood was certainly that. 3 weeks into her employment, Sarah discovered that Marcus Blackwood worked until 3 a.m. most nights. She'd returned to retrieve a file she'd forgotten, and found him still at his desk, surrounded by financial reports that painted a concerning picture. The global market instability was affecting even his diversified empire, and the weight of protecting thousands of jobs showed in the slump of his usually military straight shoulders. For the first time since her arrival, he looked up when she entered and didn't immediately bark an order or criticize her timing. Instead, he simply stared at her for a long moment, as if trying to remember why she was there. The carefully maintained fortress of his composure showed hairline cracks, revealing glimpses of the immense pressure that drove his exacting standards. "The quarterly projections for the European division," he said finally, his voice lacking its usual commanding edge. Sarah placed the files on his desk, noticing the barely touched dinner tray and the coffee cup that had long since gone cold. As she turned to leave, something made her pause. Perhaps it was recognition of a fellow workaholic, or maybe simple human compassion, but she quietly replaced his cold coffee with a fresh cup, adjusted to his exact specifications. He said nothing, but she caught the slight nod, the first acknowledgement she'd received since her arrival. A month into her employment, Sarah discovered Marcus's secret sanctuary, a rose garden hidden behind the estate's east wing. She'd been searching for him to approve urgent contracts when she spotted him through a window, kneeling among the flowers with dirt under his fingernails, and an expression of peace she'd never seen before. Here was the billionaire who struck fear into corporate boardrooms, gently pruning roses with the careful attention of someone who truly understood growing things. When he noticed her watching, instead of anger, she saw something closer to embarrassment cross his features. He stood slowly, brushing soil from his hands with the same methodical precision he applied to everything else, but there was a defensiveness in his posture that was entirely new. "My grandmother planted these," he said without being asked, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. "She believed that anything worth having required patience and daily care." He gestured toward a section of particularly vibrant blooms. "These varieties are over 50 years old. Some people think success is just about aggressive acquisition, but she taught me that the most valuable things are those you nurture over time." It was the longest personal statement he'd ever made in her presence, and Sarah realized she was seeing the man behind the intimidating reputation for the first time. A vicious thunderstorm trapped them in the mansion's library one evening, the power outage forcing them into an intimacy that neither had expected. By candlelight and firelight, Marcus looked younger, the harsh angles of his face softened by flickering shadows. They'd been working on crisis management strategies for a factory closure when the storm hit, leaving them surrounded by documents that represented real people's livelihoods hanging in the balance. "You think I'm a monster," he said quietly, not looking at her as he stared into the fire. "Most people do. They see the headlines about layoffs and restructuring, but they don't see the other side." He picked up a photograph from his desk, a picture of hundreds of employees at a ribbon-cutting ceremony. That factory in Ohio? We kept it running for 3 years after it stopped being profitable because closing it would have destroyed that town. Sometimes the cruel decision is actually the kind one. Postponed. Sarah studied his profile in the firelight, beginning to understand the weight that drove his demanding perfectionism. "You carry a lot," she said simply. For the first time since she'd known him, Marcus Blackwood looked surprised, not by criticism or challenge, but by recognition. The storm raged outside, but inside the library something fundamental had shifted between them. Their morning briefings gradually moved from his sterile office to the conservatory, where Marcus revealed another unexpected passion. Surrounded by rare orchids and tropical plants from 6 continents, he explained market fluctuations with the same care he used to describe the delicate balance of temperature and humidity needed for his prize-winning specimens. Sarah found herself looking forward to these sessions, not just for the work they accomplished, but for the glimpses they provided into the complex man behind the business empire. "You're different from the others," he observed one morning, watching her make notes about a merger while simultaneously deadheading nearby flowers without being asked. "They were all intimidated or trying to impress me. You just work." There was something like wonder in his voice, as if he'd discovered a rare species. Sarah looked up from her tablet, meeting his gaze directly. "Maybe because I needed this job enough to see past the reputation to the person doing the work." She gestured toward the thriving plants around them. "Besides, anyone who can create something this beautiful can't be as heartless as people claim." The admission hung between them like the humid air of the conservatory, sweet with the scent of jasmine and heavy with possibility. 2 months into her employment, Marcus did something unprecedented. He asked Sarah to represent him at a crucial board meeting. The Hartley Industries acquisition hung in the balance, and his usual negotiator had fallen ill. Sarah spent 3 sleepless nights preparing, knowing that failure would reflect not just on her, but on Marcus's judgment in trusting her with something so important. The boardroom at Hartley Industries was designed to intimidate, its massive table surrounded by men who'd spent decades perfecting the art of corporate warfare. They looked at Sarah with barely concealed skepticism, clearly expecting Marcus Blackwood himself to walk through the door at any moment. Instead, she calmly took her place at the head of the table, opened her presentation, and began to speak with a confidence that surprised even her. By the meeting's end, she'd secured terms more favorable than Marcus had dared hope for. The Hartley executives, initially dismissive, found themselves grudgingly impressed by her preparation, her knowledge of their business, and her ability to find creative solutions to seemingly impossible problems. When she called Marcus with the news, his silence stretched so long she thought the connection had been lost. "Well done, Sarah," he said finally, and she could hear something new in his voice. Not just approval, but respect. Sarah's personal world collided with her professional success when her father's medical bills began mounting beyond her family's ability to pay. The irony wasn't lost on her. She worked daily with a man who could solve her family's crisis with what amounted to pocket change, yet asking for help would cross every professional boundary she'd carefully maintained. She spent her evenings on the phone with insurance companies and hospitals, her days maintaining the flawless efficiency that Marcus had come to depend upon. The stress showed in subtle ways. Coffee spilled on important documents, appointments double-booked, the kind of small errors that would have resulted in immediate termination during her first week. Instead, Marcus noticed, he began staying later in the office, ostensibly working but clearly available if she needed to talk. He started bringing her proper meals instead of the energy bars she'd been surviving on, never mentioning her distraction, but ensuring she had what she needed to function. When she finally broke down in his office one evening, the words pouring out about her father's condition and her family's desperation, Marcus listened without interruption. His response was characteristically direct. "Let me help." Sarah's pride warred with her desperation, but the quiet certainty in his offer made her realize that accepting help wasn't weakness. It was trust. The evening Marcus invited Sarah to dinner in the main dining room. She knew their relationship had fundamentally changed. The massive table that could seat 20 had been set for 2, positioned to take advantage of the sunset view over his gardens. He'd arranged for her father's treatment at a private facility, handling the arrangements with the same meticulous attention he applied to business deals, but refusing to discuss it as anything other than an investment in keeping his best assistant focused on work. Over wine that probably cost more than her monthly rent, they talked about books, travel, dreams deferred by circumstances and ambition. Sarah discovered that Marcus had wanted to be a botanist before family expectations and business opportunities pulled him into the corporate world. He learned that she'd once planned to open her own consulting firm before student loans and family responsibilities made security more important than entrepreneurship. "I've become someone I'm not sure I like," he admitted as they walked through his rose garden afterward, the evening air heavy with the scent of flowers he'd tended with his own hands. "Ruthless, demanding, isolated. But with you, I remember who I wanted to be before the world taught me that kindness was weakness." Sarah stopped walking, turning to face him in the gathering dusk. "Maybe the person you wanted to be is still there," she said softly. "Maybe he just needed someone to believe he was worth finding." 6 months after her arrival, Sarah stood in the mansion's foyer with her resignation letter in hand and her bags by the door. Her father's recovery had been successful, her family's financial crisis resolved, and she'd received an offer from a prestigious consulting firm. Everything she'd originally wanted before Marcus Blackwood had complicated her understanding of what she actually needed. The decision to leave had been practical, logical, and completely devastating. Marcus appeared at the top of the grand staircase, his usual perfect composure intact, except for his hands, which gripped the banister as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. He descended slowly, each step measured and deliberate, but when he reached her, he stopped just outside arm's reach, close enough to touch, careful not to. "The Peterson merger closes next month," he said, his voice professionally neutral. "They'll need someone who understands their corporate culture." It was typical Marcus, offering her opportunities even as she walked away, ensuring her success even as it took her from him. Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice, and handed him the resignation letter. Their fingers brushed as he took it, the brief contact electric and heartbreaking. Neither mentioned the fact that the envelope remained unopened in his hand as she walked toward the door. 3 months later, Sarah returned to find Marcus exactly where she'd expected, among his roses, tending to the garden that had been his grandmother's legacy and had become their sanctuary. He looked up as she approached, soil on his hands, and surprise in his eyes that quickly gave way to something deeper, more cautious, hope tempered by the memory of goodbye. "The consulting firm wasn't what I expected," she said, settling onto the bench where they'd shared so many conversations. "Too much ambition, not enough purpose. I kept finding myself thinking about someone who taught me that the most valuable things are those you nurture over time." Marcus remained kneeling among the flowers, but his attention was completely focused on her now. "I heard through industry contacts that you're looking for a new assistant," she continued, pulling an envelope from her purse. "Not a resignation this time, but a proposal for a partnership." He rose slowly, brushing earth from his hands with the same methodical care she remembered, but his eyes never left her face. "Are you sure?" he asked. And she heard in those 2 words all the vulnerability he'd learned to share with her, all the hope he'd trained himself not to feel. "About the job or about you?" she asked in return. His smile, when it came, transformed his entire face, the cold, calculating billionaire dissolving to reveal the man who grew roses and worried about factory workers and had learned to trust someone with his carefully guarded heart. "Both," he said simply, and Sarah knew she'd finally found her way home. Thank you so much for listening to our story about Sarah and Marcus and their journey from professional obligation to personal connection. We hope you enjoyed this tale of finding love and purpose in unexpected places. Please let us know in the comments where you're listening from around the world. We love hearing from our global audience and learning about all the different places our stories reach. Your support means everything to us, and we can't wait to share more stories with you soon.